Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Duffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And with us today, we have Cindy Warwick, who's in charge of our author talks, and she will give the proper introduction for our speaker today, Brian Regal. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we jump into the presentation. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation today, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. This program is being recorded, so if you're having any problems or you need to leave early, don't worry. Everybody who registered will get a link to the recording and a follow-up email. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar dashboard, this is what your dashboard should look like, minus the handout section. There are no handouts for today. If you're using a PC or a Mac, it would look like this. If you're using a mobile device, it is going to look different depending on the device you're using, but the options will still be there. First and foremost, there is an audio section here that you can use to make sure that your speakers are working correctly and everything is connected correctly. If for whatever reason your computer audio does go out and you cannot reconnect to it somehow, there is the ability to phone in, and that is located in your confirmation email for registering. At any times, if you have any problems, you can use this raise hand button. That'll alert me that you have an issue with something, and I will get in contact with you and hopefully be able to resolve it. And lastly, as I mentioned before, there is the questions box here at the bottom where you can type in your questions, hit send, and Brian has graciously agreed to answer your questions at the end of the program today. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy for the introduction. Cindy, it doesn't seem like we can hear you. Alrighty, well, Brian, would you like to introduce yourself then at this point? I'm not sure what is wrong with Cindy's microphone at this point, but.
Sure, I can do that if you want. My name is Dr. Brian Regal. I'm Associate Professor for the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine at Kean University in New Jersey. And I am an author, educator. I write a lot about some fairly controversial issues within the history of science and medicine, which means I get screamed at and cursed at a lot on social media. Which is always fun. My current book is The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, written with my Kean University colleague, Dr. Frank Esposito. My book before that was Searching for Sasquatch, about the history of cryptozoology. And I've written books on pseudoscience, on Charles Darwin, on evolution and human evolution. My first book was Henry Fairfield Osborn, Race and the Search for the Origins of Man. And so I teach courses at Kean on the history of alchemy, on history of science and medicine, history of pseudoscience and other fun things. And so today I'm going to talk about the Jersey Devil. And let me get see if I can get my screen going here. And hopefully everyone can see that.
Looks good.
Okay, great. I'm going to see if I can make the little, wait, hang on. Not one. I wanted to make this little control bar thing go away, but apparently I'm not going to be able to, so I'll just leave it there. Hopefully you aren't seeing this and it's not getting in the way of anything. Okay, so.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So The Secret History of the Jersey Devil. most people, when they come to listen to me talk about this, or if they buy the book and they read it, they go into this hoping that they're going to find out the Jersey Devil's real, and this is what it's done, and these are the crazy things that have happened when people have encountered it. The problem with all that is that there is no Jersey Devil. It doesn't exist. I'm sorry to be the one to have to spring that on you. Everything you think you know about the Jersey Devil, or whatever you've heard about the Jersey Devil, it's all wrong. That's the problem we have here. It's all fun and games until a historian shows up. And so I'm not going to be telling you a story about people being chased around or killed or eaten by the Jersey Devil in the woods. But the story I'm going to tell you is much more interesting. It's a story that involves the very origins of the United States, not just of New Jersey, but of the United States. It involves the origins of controversial literature, the origins of fake news. We think that fake news is something that just popped up at the last half of the 20th and into the 21st century. This is something that goes all the way back to the colonial period in North America. It is a story about monsters, but it's the story of monsters of people who lie and cheat and steal and make false accusations. It's a story about land grabs and religious intolerance. It's a story about the suppression of outspoken women, all sort of things we're going through right now. So that's why Frank and I always felt that part of the reason we wanted to write this book was that it had relevance to the 21st century. So now here is the popular image. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you the fast 20-second explanation of this. So the legendary story of the Jersey Devil is this. 1735, in a region of what is now southern New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, for those of you who are tuning in from outside the country, a region called the Pine Barrens. Millions of years ago, it was actually the ocean. And if you know anything about American geography, the ocean extended all the way into what is now the Delaware River, to where the city of Philadelphia is. And so large chunks of New Jersey were essentially on the bottom of the ocean. But then as time went by and the waters receded, it left the southern part of the state basically a flat, sandy plain, which was good for pine trees growing and other conifers, but not a whole lot else. And so because it's a fairly barren area and it's got a lot of pine trees, it's commonly referred to as the Pine Barrens. And so the story goes, in 1735, in the middle of the Pine Barrens, a woman who, of course, was a witch, who went by the name of Mother Leeds, gives birth to her 13th child. So it's got to be the 13th child. But instead of a baby, as she's giving birth, she screams out, "Let this one be a devil." That's sort of the classic quote line. That's the Shakespeare line from the Jersey Devil story. And instead of a normal baby coming out, the thing you're looking at right now, this is what comes out. Hopefully a little smaller when it was actually leaving his mother's womb. But this is basically a kind of a weird combination of a horse and a goat and a deer and a bat. And it flops down onto the floor. The whole family is there. They're freaking out and screaming because this just came out of a woman. And the creature gets its one and only line. It's really not much of a line in the whole story. It just sort of screams at the onlookers. And then instead of running out the door, for some reason, it climbs into the fireplace, which presumably had a fire going, and it climbs up the chimney, sort of like a reverse Santa Claus, gets out of the chimney, disappears into the woods to spend the next several century accosting innocent passersby and getting up to other sort of hijinks. So that's the basic legendary story. But like I said, I'm going to tell you a slightly different one. Now, here is our field of play, if you will. Hopefully you can see my little finger going around there, moving around. The area of interest is right down in here. This is the Pine Barrens. Up here, this is the part of New Jersey that most people think of. When they think of New Jersey, they think of oil refineries and the Turnpike and Bruce Springsteen and the Sopranos and these big mega cities. And that's all going on up here. But down here, again, this is the Pine Barrens, so the territory is very different. Philadelphia is right around here, and the sort of home of the story, Burlington, is a little bit north in the up the Delaware River, right about here. So this is just to give you a kind of point of reference for where all the action is taking place. Now this is Lord Cornbury. Now, if you grew up in New Jersey, you probably learned about Lord Cornbury in either your grammar school history course or that one high school history class that you were forced to take. If you're not from the U.S. or you're not from New Jersey, you probably never heard of Lord Cornbury, but sort of an early important character here. Lord Cornbury became the first royal governor of New Jersey in 1701. Now, as you're sitting there listening to me, you may be getting a little confused because I keep referring to Lord Cornbury in the male gender, and he was male. This painting, however, leads some people to think otherwise. This is a famous painting which currently hangs in the New York Historical Society. You can go there to this day and see it. It's pride of place. As soon as you walk in, boom, it's right there. And Lord Cornbury was accused by his detractors, and again, as with so much in this story, this should sound vaguely familiar today in the 21st century. His detractors made up all sorts of stuff about him to make him look bad. And one of the things they did was they claimed he was a cross-dresser. And this painting, many decades later, became associated with Lord Cornbury. The problem is we have no idea who the person in this painting is. It was associated with Lord Cornbury in the sort of early 19th century, and it's sort of stuck. We now know that Lord Cornbury was not a cross-dresser. He was accused of that to make him look bad. And this painting, again, we know it's not him, but we really have no idea who this person is. Lord Cornbury was, he was a bit of a spendthrift. He was not good with money. He stole a lot of money, looted the local treasury, and he goes down in history as one of the worst governors of New Jersey. Now, if you know anything about New Jersey history, you know that's no mean feat to be called the worst governor. There's a lot of people battling for that title right up into the 21st century. But he's sort of the first royal governor. And so he gets a lot, of bad stuff said about him. The reason why he's involved in this story is because when he becomes governor, he gets assigned to him about 8 or 10 local New Jersey residents, men, of course, who are kind of local movers and shakers, men of consequence, that kind of thing, to be his counselor. One of them is Daniel Leeds. And Daniel Leeds is really sort of the star of our show. He's the hero, he's the protagonist. He is the character around which this whole story will swirl. He's English, he's born in England, in Leeds, England, not the Leeds, the large city in the north of England, but the much smaller city south of London. Born, we think, around 1651. He's got several brothers, he's got parents, and they're Quakers. And at the time, it was essentially illegal to be a Quaker in England. The Quakers were heavily oppressed by the Puritans, and you couldn't. There were laws that said that more than 5 Quakers couldn't congregate on a street corner. You had to, if you went to your Quaker religious services, you had to be careful that the crown spies weren't there. Daniel Leeds' father actually spends some time in the Tower of London because he's a Quaker. And so in the sort of mid to late 1670s, they decide to leave England and come to America and start life anew. And that's what they do. Their mom, Mrs. Leeds, she doesn't get to go. She comes down with smallpox and dies and is buried in London. I actually found her grave a few years ago while I was writing this book. And so they come, the men all come to America. Before he does, Daniel, who's in his sort of mid-20s when all this happens, he gets married to a woman in England. She dies before they leave. We have no idea who that is. Could never track her down. But then he comes to America and he starts a series of marriages, originally to Anne Stacy in 1681, and who dies in Burlington giving birth to their daughter Anne, who also doesn't live very long. He remarries Dorothy Young, who she's sort of the most successful of Daniel Leeds' wives. She'll produce 8 children in quick succession by 1699. Then she dies. He marries for a final time to the sister of his best friend, Jane Revel, and then she dies after that. So it really wasn't safe to be married to Daniel Leeds. Now, we couldn't find any evidence of any sort of wrongdoing, and nothing sinister. It's just that his wives had a tendency to die. The last wife, Jane, there are versions of the Jersey Devil story that call Mother Leeds Jane, but we have no idea who that person actually was. Our opinion was that the character of Mother Leeds, who we'll talk about later, probably didn't exist, probably a made-up character. But of the actual people involved in this, Daniel Leeds' son, his next to youngest son, Titan Leeds, he's the other important character because he's going to take over from his father a little later in the story. Now, there are no contemporary images of Daniel Leeds. This was the best I could find. He was a Quaker. Quaker men tended to dress in similar fashion. The drawing you're looking at is actually of a guy named George Fox, who's one of the founders of Quakerism. He comes to America, and as we'll see later, George Fox and other Quaker leaders and Daniel Leeds will have a falling out, and that is what will kind of get this whole legend of a monster going. But this picture you're looking at, this is sort of a standard garb for a Quaker person in England or in North America at the time. Now, Daniel Leeds is an interesting guy. He has no formal education because in England, Quakers were not allowed to attend university. He couldn't go to Oxford, he couldn't go to Cambridge. But the Quakers were very much into education. They saw education as important, as a way forward. Education is what would sort of rescue you from your position that would allow you to move forward. And so the Quakers had established these sort of unofficial schools where tutors would teach kids and books would be traded back and forth. And so they went through a lot of effort to educate themselves. And Daniel was an autodidact. He's heavily self-educated. He reads voraciously, all sorts of things: history, science, theology, literature. He's one of these guys who, you know, if he got anywhere near a book, he was automatically reading it because he saw that as an important thing to do. That the mark of a good person, of a good Christian, was that you were educated, you knew a lot of stuff about a lot of things. And in his education, he starts to get influenced by the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, which are just getting going. These are ideas which are just beginning to kind of spread around. Isaac Newton will publish his Principia shortly. A lot of important work is being done. Francis Bacon is publishing. And so this idea of enlightenment and scientific knowledge, as a historian of science, as I tell my students, we don't really call this period the scientific revolution anymore. It's a lot more complicated than that, but most people, if I say scientific revolution, they'll sort of get an idea. In fact, I'm teaching the course on Introduction to the History of Science at Kane right now, and we're just entering into the part of the semester where we go into painfully excruciating detail about, was there a scientific revolution? Should we have called it that? Should it be called the second scientific revolution? And all sorts of other interesting intellectual things, but way beyond what we're going to be able to talk about here today. But one of the outlets that Daniel Leeds decides is to create an almanac. Almanacs are extremely popular, and he gets it into his head that he wants to bring the philosophy and the ideas of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution to what is still being referred to as British North America. If you're from this area, you know how densely populated it is, with highways and cities and all that. But in Daniel Leeds's day, New Jersey was the edge of the empire. There is a mountain range, relatively small mountain range, not far from where I live, called the Watchung Mountains. If you're from New Jersey, you're familiar with the Watchung Mountains. That was anything west of the Watchungs was like the moon. The native people were there, but European settlers had virtually no idea what was out there. That sort of knowledge doesn't come along yet. And so Daniel Leeds and the other people who live here in the Jerseys, they are at the edge of the empire. They're almost at the edge of the world. If the world is flat, if any of them believed the world was flat, very few of them did. But if they did, they would have thought the edge of the world was right beyond the Watchung Mountains. And so he has this idea. He is going to spread these important ideas of science and literature and history and theology to the edge of the world. And he's going to do that with an almanac. And that's what you're looking at. This is the original Leeds Almanac from 1687. It's what's called a broadsheet. That means it's a single page. The back of this would have been blank. There aren't many of these left. I had to go to the British Library in London to find an actual existing copy of it, an original. And that's because while Daniel Leeds thought he was doing this wonderfully intellectual thing for his neighbors didn't think that. The Quaker elders did not like the almanac. They thought it had too much occult in it. And they reacted in the completely opposite way he hoped they would react. They disliked this thing so much that they went around and collected up copies and destroyed them. So not only is Daniel Leeds the first author in New Jersey, he's also the first censored author in New Jersey. And this was quite, a crushing blow to him, because he had found what he thought was a home within the Quaker Church. He saw the Quakers as, the proper liberal opposition to the much more conservative Puritans, and he felt like they had turned on him, that he was doing this thing for sincere, positive reasons, and they kind of destroyed it. They even went to his printer, the first printer in New Jersey, William Bradford, and they took all the copies of the almanac from there and destroyed them. And Bradford was very relieved that they didn't destroy his printing press as well. And so his first attempt, Daniel Leeds' first attempt at doing this thing, gets thwarted. He then decides, well, if they didn't like the almanac, I'm going to write a book. So he puts together a book called The Temple of Wisdom for the Little World, which William Bradford publishes in 1688. And it's kind of Daniel Leeds' worldview. He combines science and history and literature and astronomy and astrology and theology and Christianity into this kind of heady stew, which he thought would help lead people to greater awareness, greater awareness of the universe. One of the things we have to keep in mind about this period is that where today, many, especially fundamentalist Christians, when they hear words like occult or astrology, they get very nervous and they think it's anti-God, they think it's anti-religion, and they come down against it. But in Daniel Leeds' day, there were a whole number of Christian philosophers who thought that things like astrology, things like studying the occult, were not only not anti-Christian, but were very pro-Christian, because they believed that if the universe and everything in it is created by God, then it is the good Christian's responsibility to understand all of creation. And so to study astrology, that helped you understand the movements of the heavens that God created. And so they didn't see any problem with this, of combining these, what we would see today as very different and opposing concepts. And so the Quaker elders dislike the Temple of Wisdom even more than they disliked the Almanac. And so again, they start rounding up copies of this and destroying them. They're so efficient at doing this that the only reason we know that Leeds published this book is because there is one lone forlorn copy that still exists, which is currently in the Pennsylvania Historical Society. But if it wasn't for that one copy, we would have no idea that Daniel Leeds wrote this book. But this starts getting the backlash going. In 1698, the Quaker elders call Daniel Leeds evil. They actually use the word evil, and they put it into some of their notebooks and calendars. By 1700, the great Quaker apologist Calipuzzi publishes his own book calling Daniel Leeds Satan's Harbinger. Now today, in 2021, if someone called you Satan's Harbinger, we probably wouldn't take it as that much of an insult. We probably might even find it adorable. It's cute that somebody would call me something so archaic as Satan's Harbinger. But in 1700, this was the kiss of death. To be called publicly Satan's Harbinger was something which could destroy your career. It could get people to hate you. It really was a significant charge. Now here is the title page from the Temple of Wisdom. If you ever find, if you have a great granny who's got a bunch of old books and stuff in her attic, take a look. If you see one of these, you just hit the jackpot, because they're incredibly valuable. A couple of years ago, an original Leeds Almanac, not the one I showed you, but the ones I'm going to show you in a minute, original later Leeds Almanac was sold for $10,000. The original copy of the Temple of Wisdom probably would go significantly more than that. So have a look around to see if you can find it. Now, not everybody hated Daniel Leeds. We found this letter in the Increase Mather papers up in Boston of someone. We don't know who wrote this. The envelope is missing. There's no signature on it. It's unlikely that it was from Increase Mather or anyone within the Mather family, but it wound up in the collection. And you can see it's rather old and deteriorated, but basically the author says, I just read the Temple of Wisdom, Mr. Leeds. I thought it was wonderful. You make a lot of really good points. I'm so glad somebody's writing about this. And so he did have a few fans out there. Not everybody hated him. And so what happens is, after the Temple of Wisdom is destroyed, Leeds decides he's not going to give in. He's going to fight. He resurrects the Almanac. And instead of doing the one-page broadsheet like the original one, he decides to make it in the what was by now the common sort of booklet version of the almanac. If any of you are old enough to remember the TV guide, almanacs were about that big, about 4 or 5 by 6 inches, very popular. This format allowed Leeds to put other material in there, and he's going to use this to his advantage. He's going to stretch the almanac concept as far as he can make it. Now, the copy you're looking at from 1738, if you look down the bottom here, it doesn't say Daniel Leeds, it says Titan Leeds. That's because by 1738, Daniel Leeds has passed away, and his next youngest son has taken over publishing the almanac. And the other reason why I'm showing this is because if you look up here, the Leedses were in the legendary version. The Leedses are these kind of illiterate country bumpkins, who live in rough hovels in the middle of the Pine Barrens, these very sort of crude, almost criminal lives, and they're bad people and you should stay away from them. The reality is that the Leeds were elevated enough that they had their own coat of arms, which was not easy to get. And here it is right here. And now if you look at it more closely, you'll see these little creatures, the 3 of them. Now, some people think these are wyverns, which are kind of an archaic word for dragon. Some people think they're eagles or hawks or something. And as you can tell, they're rather crudely drawn here. But I always thought that these look suspiciously like the image of what the Jersey Devil is supposed to look like. Kind of a, horsey head, wings. I have no idea how this fits into the overall story. We were never able to find a connection. It's just something that we found, that Frank Esposito and I found very peculiar, very interesting, that there are these images on Leeds' Almanac which look sort of like the common modern version of the Leeds, of the Jersey Devil. Now, that brings me to another important point. We've got 2 monsters here, 2 devils. We have the Jersey Devil, and we also have the earlier Leeds Devil. Now, the Leeds Devil comes from, it's a political animal. It comes in part thanks to this guy, Ben Franklin. Franklin comes along. He famously comes from Boston down to Philadelphia, and he decides to start an almanac as well. But the big competition by then is the Leeds Almanac. Everybody reads the Leeds Almanac, and so Franklin has to compete with that. And so famously, he creates Poor Richard's Almanac, and in the very first issue of Poor Richard, Franklin attacks Titan Leeds. He says that, through the voice of Richard Saunders, he says that Titan Leeds is up to some sort of a cult, no good. He might be a sorcerer. He also, Poor Richard claims that Titan Leeds has died, and that this person walking around saying he's Titan Leeds is really just a spirit, a ghost. He also intimates that maybe Titan Leeds was a sorcerer who's brought himself back from the dead. All of this done very tongue-in-cheek, very much in a way to, just like today, where we make up stuff about people we don't like and publish it, and people believe it because they see it in print and say, "Oh yes, there must be a pedophile ring running out of the basement of a pizzeria that's run by Hillary Clinton. It's online. It's in the papers. It must be real." And so this is something which, here in North America at least, is largely fostered at the start by Ben Franklin. He was having a grand old time doing this. Titan Leeds did not care for it, as you could imagine. Titan Leeds writes back that this guy, Ben Franklin, is a liar, and he's making this stuff up. And every time Leeds responds seriously, Franklin responds in a much more joking way that, I don't know who this person is, this sorcerer, this ghost who claims to be Titan Leeds, saying bad things about me. Titan Leeds and I were friends while he was alive. And so this is how it begins. This is how the legend of what will become the Jersey Devil starts to grow. Now, what also sort of contributes to this is that at the time, in 16th and 17th century North America and England in particular, the image of a creature like this already exists. And it has nothing to do with New Jersey, nothing to do with the Leeds family. These sort of devilish creatures with wings. This is where, when the Jersey Devil starts to take shape, it gets its morphology from these early political satires, anti-Quaker writings. Here's my favorite. This is from 1641, so this is some years before. Pamphlet wars were very popular, and hopefully there are no little kids in the audience, but this very Jersey Devil looking creature is doing to this guy exactly what you think it's doing. But the image of a creature like this is already in the popular conscience before the Jersey Devil legend comes along. Here's just one more, just to give you a wide view of this. Now, in some books on the Jersey Devil, and see, if you go online, you'll find tons of stuff on the Jersey Devil there, and you'll often come across reference to something called the Vance Larner Diary. This is used by believers to say, look, in 1790, there was already a guy talking about this creature flying around the Pine Barrens. So the story of the Jersey Devil, of Mother Leeds, of all that must be true. The problem is it's a hoax. It doesn't exist. We searched everywhere. We couldn't find it. And so until we actually come across the original primary source, we go with that this is just a modern hoax made up. Monsters are very popular during this time period. This is Martin Luther's infamous monk calf. Monsters were used to denigrate the Catholic Church, to denigrate individuals, to denigrate government. Anybody you didn't like, you made up some kind of monster story about them. Here is from, they were extremely popular in books. This is from Aldrovandi's Monstorum Historia from 1696. And you can see, again, this very sort of Jersey Devil-like creature. We use this this cutie pie right here on the cover of our book. So monsters are everywhere. Now, for the legend of Mother Leeds, we looked around to try to find, is there any historical figure which might have possibly been an inspiration for Mother Leeds? And the best example we could come up with is Anne Hutchinson. If you know your early American history, if you know early women's history, Anne Hutchinson was a Puritan from Boston, extremely crucial, pivotal, early proponent of what we would today call women's liberation, of women's equality. She was hated by the Puritan male hierarchy of the church in Boston. She was threatened, she was attacked for saying that women should be allowed to run church services, that women should have equality. And she also had a lot of kids. The last one of which was a stillborn, heavily deformed, what at the time would have been called a monstrous birth. And it was well known, and the Puritan preachers at the time used this terrible thing, the birth of this dramatically deformed child, as proof that God hated Anne Hutchinson, and that women should know their place, keep their place, because if you don't, God will do to you what God did to Anne Hutchinson. And so the idea of an outspoken woman with a lot of children who gives birth to literally a monster, the parallels between Anne Hutchinson and Mother Leeds are such that we think that there was probably influence. The story of Van Hutchinson was well known throughout the colonies, throughout the British colonies, and so here is a possible model for Mother Leeds. Now, so years are going by, and the Leeds Devil story is growing. And this is also at a time where the ideas of independence are just beginning to kind of percolate in the North American colonies. It isn't really widespread just yet, but this is a period where people are starting to think maybe we shouldn't be part of the British Empire. And Daniel Leeds, who is gone by now, he's passed away by now. Titan Leeds has passed away by now. The Leeds Almanac has gone extinct. But because Daniel Leeds had been the official counselor to Lord Cornbury, who was the official representative of the empire, the Leeds family now gets attached to the empire. And so if you're for the empire, you're against America, you're either for us or you're against us. And so this is where the concept of the Leeds Devil starts to kind of spread around. But again, it starts off as a political thing, not a physical monster. That only really starts to happen, that transformation from Leeds Devil from being a political animal to being a monster in the woods, doesn't really begin until the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. Most people will think, and if you look this up online, most Jersey Devil websites and people writing about it will tell you, oh, the Jersey Devil's born in 1735. That doesn't really occur until the early 20th century. I mean, the term Jersey Devil is not being used yet until the 20th century. And what happens is, in 1905, and then again in 1909, a series of events occur in New Jersey where people claim to see weird footprints in the woods, in the snow, that nobody can place. And so people start thinking, oh, maybe this was a monster. You know, when I was a kid, my great granny, she used to talk about something called the Leeds Devil. Maybe it's the Leeds Devil. And so as a result of that, I can show you the exact spot, literally the exact spot where the Jersey Devil was born. And I hope you're all sitting down for this. Here it is. That is the birthplace of the Jersey Devil. Not a rude hovel in the Pine Barrens in 1735, but in the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum in 1909. Dime museums were extremely popular. The 9th and Arch in Philadelphia was very popular. You can see this wonderful Victorian building. Unfortunately, if you go into Google Maps and you type in 9th and Arch Street, Philadelphia, you'll get a picture. Unfortunately, this wonderful building is long since gone. It's now just a city parking lot for people who work in the offices downtown. You park your car there. Unfortunately, this wonderful building is gone. But the dime museums, they showed all sorts of weird stuff. They were basically like traveling freak shows, but that didn't travel. They stayed in the building. And the owner was a guy named C.A. Bradenberg. His press agent was Norman Jeffries, and they're looking for the latest thing. And they hear about these reports of strange footprints. And Jeffrey says, okay, we can turn this into something because we're hearing people use this term Leeds Devil. That's perfect for us. But Jeffries thought it didn't quite sing. It didn't have the pow. And so he thinks about it for a few minutes, and suddenly he's got a brainstorm. He says, I got it, Jersey Devil. And so that's what they go with. And that's when the name comes up. But then they got to show something. They got something for people to look at. And so they rent a kangaroo. Let me say that again. They rent a kangaroo from a place in Albany that rents exotic animals. How a place in Albany got hold of a kangaroo, I have no idea. We couldn't figure that one out. But they had a kangaroo, and these guys rent it. They bring it back. They paint it green. They attach little wings to it, and they put it on stage in the dark with a spotlight so the rubes can come in and see the Jersey Devil. They have a little kid standing off to the side with a long stick. He's hiding behind a curtain, long stick with a nail in the end of it. You can probably see where this is going. And when a group of people comes in, the kid stabs the poor kangaroo with the nail. The kangaroo starts screaming, as you can imagine, and hopping around inside its cage, affrighting the patrons. And then they get hustled out, and the next group comes in. And this is a huge draw. People are lining up around the block to see this. But after a few weeks go by, people are saying, you know, that just looks like a kangaroo that somebody poured green paint on. And so after a while, the jig is up, and the guys at the museum say, yeah, oh, look at that, it's fake. We faked it. There's really no such thing as a Jersey Devil. And some people say, well, why would you fake this? And they were like, hello, that's what we do. We fake stuff. We're a dime museum. What do you expect? But the genie's out of the bottle. Despite the fact that the operators of the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museums tell everyone, this is fake, we made it up, it's a publicity stunt, it's a hoax, people start saying, no, I actually saw that thing in the woods. And that will begin to snowball. And throughout the 20th century, right up till today, people will insist seriously that they saw the Jersey Devil running around the woods, and that it's not a hoax, and that it's real. Now here's the cover of our book, me and Frank J. Esposito, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil. And you can see this. As I said before, we used this image from Al Dravandi on the cover, and you can find it on eBay and other online places, and even in bookstores. I've seen it on shelves in Barnes and Nobles and other independent bookstores. And so it's easy to find. It was originally in hardcover. It's in paperback now, so it's easy to find. Here's my previous book, Searching for Sasquatch, Crackpots, Eggheads, and Cryptozoology. And I'm with the Department of History at Kean University, whose Twitter feed is @Kean. Here's the web page for the department. It's a great department, terrific State University history department, great authors, all published, all in media and on TV and stuff, great students. Here's our department logo. I'm on Twitter at Tarbosaur, TARBOSAUR. If you want to come on there and watch people yell at me at stuff, or yell at me over things you want to yell at me for, that's there. That's what I do for a living. And I want to thank everyone, wherever you are, for coming in to listen to my talk. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Alrighty,
Well,
great.
before
Thank
Andrew,
you.
before
Yeah,
Andrew comes in, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, and I wanted to welcome everybody. Sorry, Andrew, I'm going to let you go on with the questions, but I did want to just welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. All right, Andrew, take it away.
Sure, Cindy. So yes, if anybody does have any questions, there is a questions box in the dashboard where you can type in your questions, and that'll get sent to us, and we'll be happy to give them to Brian, and hopefully he can provide you with some answers. Let's see here. First, we're going to start off not so much with a question, but kind of an observation related to Lord Cornbury. Someone has said in the Native American tradition of the time among the Mohawks in New York, if you were representing someone, you dressed like that person. From what I know of Lord Cornbury's sense of humor, he would have gotten a kick out of having his portrait painted in his representation of Queen Anne in his role of representative to the Lenape tribes. Thing to think about, at least.
Yeah, sure. No, that makes perfect sense. The thing is that painting, it has been traced back to much later than well after Cornbury was gone. There was a really terrific book that came out a few years ago by a historian named Patricia Bonomi, who goes into the Lord Cornbury, the life of Lord Cornbury, in painfully excruciating details. Terrific book. And she's the one who figured out all the stuff that the painting, we don't know who the painting is of, and that it was never actually associated with Lord Cornbury until much later. But the painting is still in, it's still in the New York Historical Society, so you can go see it.
First question, is the printer William Bradford the same man who came over on the Mayflower in 1620?
Good question. No, there's like a half a dozen William Bradfords in colonial American history, but this was not that one. He's not the Mayflower guy. He's the later one. He was a printer. He was a Quaker as well, and he learned printing from an important early Quaker printer in England, and he managed to bring a printing press to America. It's thought his first shop was in Burlington. That's how he meets Daniel Leeds. But then he'll become much more famous later when he opens up a print shop in Philadelphia, and then his son opens up a print shop in New York. But no, it's a different person.
Can you speak to the origin of the place in Galloway Township called Leeds Point?
Yeah, there's the Leeds family was a big family, and they lasted for a long time. There are still members of the Leeds family. They were extremely important beyond the whole Jersey Devil thing. The Leeds family essentially founds Atlantic City. The first mayor of Atlantic City was a Leeds. They were heavily involved in, not so much anymore, but heavily involved in New Jersey history. And they were so widespread, they were so influential that you almost can't throw a rock in South Jersey without hitting something with the name Leeds on it. There's Leeds streets, Leeds avenues, Leeds Point. They had a huge influence on the area and are remembered in a lot of place names.
Where was Anne Hutchinson from?
She's originally from Boston, and she gets run out of Boston because of her outspoken views. She goes to one of the few genuine places of liberal tolerance in North America at the time. She goes to Providence, Rhode Island, and she eventually gets chased out of there, and she winds up moving out into the forest primeval of Connecticut, where she eventually gets caught up in local violence between the native people and Puritans trying to, who were trying to kill as many native people as possible to take over the land. And she winds up dying in an Indian raid.
How long did the research take for this book? Fabulous talk, by the way.
Thanks. It took us about, we started this right after, one was Hurricane Sandy. Frank and I were having lunch in the school cafeteria right after school reopened after Hurricane Sandy, and we got to talking, and we said, let's do something together. And we both at the same time, the light bulbs went off over our heads. Let's do something on the Jersey Devil. And so when it was that 2015 or 16 that Hurricane Sandy came through, we started it right after there, and finished it about a year and a half ago when it came, right when it came out. So I think we spent about three, maybe 4 years on it. Most people don't really appreciate how long historical research and historical books, especially academic books, if you're just making up crap, you can write a book in no time. But if you are like we historians, we have to rely on primary sources, and we have to get our facts straight, and we can't just make stuff up. It takes much longer. So like 3-4 years.
It's kind of like a follow-up. What got you interested in pursuing the research for this book?
Well, like I said, I'm a historian. My PhD is in the history of modern history and literature with a specialty in the history of science. And I've always been interested in sort of the outre, the stuff out on the edges. My career has basically been one long discussion of fringe science, of pseudoscience, of weird beliefs. outsider authors, and it seemed unnatural that we would look at this. When Frank and I first began thinking about this, we did what historians do, is we looked at the historiography, the writing, what have other people written about the Jersey Devil? And we very quickly realized that the vast majority, there were a few good things out there, but the vast majority of the work on the Jersey Devil was really awful, was terrible, it was uninformed, it was just, saying the same unchecked things over and over again. And so we thought, let's do a proper historical analysis of the topic. And so that's what we did.
Can you characterize almanacs of that time? Were they like gossip magazines with articles?
Some of them were. Some of them were very simple and straightforward. They just gave the weather. I mean, almanacs still exist. You can still get them. But the point of them was to get inexpensive printings of what was thought to be projections of the weather for the year, because most people are living in agrarian situations, so that's important information. Is it going to be cold this year? Is it going to be really rainy this year? And so most almanacs had at least that in there, and some of them more daring, forward-thinking almanac creators like Daniel Leeds would start putting in articles about other things. They would run little short stories. Sometimes it got really political, and so it was it all depended upon who the publisher was. Some of them did get very political. Some of them didn't.
The boogeyman and Lupe Guru are imaginary characters with purpose to make little boys and girls behave properly. Why did the Jersey Devil never pick up this characteristic?
That's a good question. We never really thought of it that way. But yeah, most monsters like that are used in that sort of way, and the Jersey Devil never really was. But I think that's because by the 1790s, the Leeds Devil mythos is starting to go extinct, and it largely disappears for the better part of a century. Talked about only on occasion, and talked about as just some old weird belief that nobody holds anymore. And it's really not until the 20th century that the Jersey Devil is born. And why doesn't the Jersey Devil become this sort of object of, scaring the crap out of your kids to make them behave? It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for it. Sorry.
I believe there is Jimmy Leeds Road down off Route 30 towards Atlantic City near an Oyster Creek restaurant. Any relationship to the Jersey Devil in this area?
Oh, I'm sorry, say the last part of that again.
Any relationship to the Jersey Devil in this area?
Well, while we were doing this book, I went driving around down there because, as a historian, you should have some idea of the actual places you're talking about. And I found, to my amusement, there are quite a few sort of roadside, roadhouses, roadside burger joints, liquor stores, diners that kind of play up the Jersey Devil thing. I saw a lot of places that were selling Jersey Devil T-shirts, and bumper stickers and things. But it's the same sort of thing that goes on around Loch Ness. I mean, you can't go to Loch Ness. Gift shops and Loch Ness Monster T-shirts and things are everywhere. It's not quite as intense here as it is there in Scotland, but it's, people, trying to make a little bit of money off the story.
We're going to go to just an interesting factoid about today. There are some direct descendants of Daniel Leeds on this webinar, including our family genealogist, and we'd like to thank you for the presentation and the book.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah, it was, I've had people come up to me and say, I loved your book. I loved your genealogy of the Leeds family. I said, what genealogy? Oh, the Jersey Devil book. and there's a lot about we felt, Frank and I felt that it was important to tell the story of the reality of the Leeds family, because if you just go by the legend, as I said before, the Leeds family is a sort of unsavory clan of sort of, backwoods river people that you should be scared of, when in fact it was quite the opposite. Daniel Leeds was erudite. He was very well educated. The Leeds family were important movers and shakers in New Jersey history, nothing like the legend. And so, yeah, I'm glad that there are members of the Leeds family who liked what we did and enjoyed what we did. It was our pleasure.
And kind of related to that, do you know if any Leeds family fought in the Revolutionary War?
Oh yeah, several of them did, and with some distinction. At the Battle of Monmouth, at the Battle of Red Bank, there were Leedses on station around Sandy Hook, keeping watches on British warship coming and going. So yeah, a number of them. There was one regiment. I forget the name of it. I think the Gloucester Infantry. Had so many Leeds members in it that they almost thought about calling it the Leeds Regiment. So yeah, the Leeds were very involved in the Revolution, and I think that Daniel Leeds was gone by the time the Revolution actually begins. But if he had lived like a generation later, we'd be talking about Daniel Leeds as one of the founding fathers. That's how important his life and career were to American history. Most of which is largely forgotten today, and if anybody remembers it at all, they only think about it in terms of the Jersey Devil.
Righty, so what do you think was happening in Bordentown in 1909 that's been attributed to the New Jersey Devil?
I don't know. I'm not a country boy. I was born and raised in the Ironbound section of Newark. I didn't see a forest till I went overseas with the Army. What people who study the history of odd phenomena like UFOs and cryptozoology and things are beginning to realize now is that even people who do something for a living can often mistake what they see. We say, oh, a person who grew up in the forest their whole life, they could tell a difference between a bat and a deer and the evidence seems to suggest that not always. We have this thing about, well, if an Air Force fighter pilot sees something and they think it's a UFO, it must be UFO because they're trained to, identify things. Yeah, they are, but they misidentify stuff all the time. We all do. And if you've ever been in the Pine Barrens, it can be a rather intimidating place, even today in the 21st century. It's still heavily forested. It gets oppressively hot in the summer. It often gets, feet worth of snow in the winter. At night, it's pitch black. And there are a lot of wildlife that lives there. And, someone who has no experience with wildlife, I can imagine that you could see a perfectly normal animal that lives in the area and mistake it for something unusual. So that's my best explanation for that.
Did any officials of any New Jersey governments investigate the physical possibility of a New Jersey Devil?
Yeah, there were a couple of things back in the mid-20th century. None of it taken that seriously, At some point during the Depression, they made the Jersey Devil the official state demon. I'm not sure how many states have an official state demon, but we've got one, and it's the Jersey Devil. I don't think there may have been a few local, sheriffs or local police who might have taken it seriously. There was one time where a group of concerned citizens tried to get the local sheriff to do an official search for this, and the sheriff tried to be as nice as possible about it, but basically told them, no, this is nonsense. I'm not going to put, we don't have that many deputies to begin with. I'm not going to go send them out looking for a Jersey Devil that doesn't exist. So basically, no.
On a broader scale, you detail the life of a lie. On one hand, you have the Jersey Devil, on the other, and around the same time, you have the Salem witch trials. When would you say the public started standing up and using their critical thinking skills to become less susceptible to believing these stories? Do you know what strategies were used back then to push back against a big lie?
That's a tough question. You got a couple of weeks for me to answer that. I think here in the 21st century, we can very easily get lulled into a false sense of complacency, thinking that most people think critically, most people understand the importance of scholarship and science. Even if you don't really understand science, you know the importance of it, and medicine. The problem is, you know, we can look right now. I mean, literally as we're sitting here, there are people not only across the country, not only around the world, but right here in New Jersey, who are attacking teachers supposedly teaching something they don't even know what they're talking about. There are demonstrations about masks and vaccinations, and the cynical side of me looks at the reality of 21st century life and says, we haven't learned to think critically. Some people do, but they tend to be in the minority. The vast majority of our fellow citizens have no idea how to think critically. They're easily led. They are shown, you know, the sun in the sky, and they're told it's the moon and it's the middle of the night, and they say, yeah, okay, I believe that. You know, and so unfortunately, I don't think we have learned to think critically. I don't think there was a moment where the vast majority of human beings said, you know, we should think critically, because if we don't, it's going to cost us our lives. I know it's probably not the answer you were hoping for, but there we are.
If anybody does have any more questions, please submit them now. While we wait, I just kind of want to possibly end on a little bit of a story that somebody shared. Somebody's a great presentation. I grew up in South Jersey, and as fifth graders, we went camping at camp. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the camp. And the myth was alive and well. We woke up one day and saw cloven hoof prints of the Jersey Devil. Parents and counselors didn't tell us any different. It made it a lot of fun. I love my New Jersey history. I'm so glad to learn more of it. Thank you. So.
Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you want, you can look at my Kane University webpage. Just Google my name and it'll come right up. Again, I'm on Twitter at Tarbosaur. And so if you want to ask me questions, if you want to email me, my email is on the Kane webpage. And I'm happy to, you know, this is what I do for a living. I'm a historian at a state university, and it's part of my brief to engage with the public and help explain things the best I can.
Andrew, that was a great story. I loved it. And I have too been to the Pine Barrens, and I totally agree with you, Brian, that you don't always know what you're seeing when you're down there. I've been there in the in the nighttime, and you know, you look at something and you know, maybe can believe that, oh, there is a Jersey Devil, when it's really just a deer with, you know, a bird flying by or something like that. But probably not that simple. Right. But I just wanted to add my thanks for this talk. This is one part of my job I love. Sometimes the organizing is a little bit difficult. With you, it wasn't, but I love being able to hear the history of New Jersey and just to be able to learn more. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who.
Thanks for having me on. And for anybody who thinks this is not a Jersey, not the skull of a Jersey Devil behind me, it's actually a werewolf.